You've always been a burden. Get out of our lives. Addison didn't scream. She spat the words out as if expelling something rotten from her mouth. She stood on the other side of the table, hands tense, eyes glowing with fury, while the chicken and rice still steamed. Graham, her husband, lowered his gaze. Piper, my granddaughter, pressed her lips together. I said nothing, just looked at my suitcases on the living room floor, one open, my white linen blouse half slipped out, as if it too were giving up. I didn't cry, didn't even take a deep breath. I just sat back down, my legs trembling under the table, and gripped the glass of water with a hand that no longer responded as it once did. The sun pierced the window like a golden knife. It smelled of toast and betrayal. It was Sunday, the last lunch in that house, and in that moment, I knew it. They didn't see me, not as a mother, not as a woman, not as anything, just a shadow in the kitchen, an old woman getting in the way between the blender and the television. They had brought me to this point without my realizing it. And if I ever had a place in that house, I had just been banished from it with a single sentence. But what they didn't know is that you can't chase away what's already gone, because I had long since stopped living there. The creeping estrangement. Addison used to say I had Papa's smile. She told me that as a child. She'd take my arm, ask me to braid her hair, and hug me from behind when I was washing dishes. Don't wash any more, Mom. Come watch movies with me. I'd dry my hands on my apron and sit beside her. Elias would watch us from the doorway. He never said much, but the way he tilted his head said we were his home. After that, everything changed. Elias died on a cold morning, one of those days that have no scent, only the sound of the wind and the footsteps of neighbors on the sidewalk. We buried him with a blue scarf I had knitted for him shortly after our wedding. Addison didn't cry. She held my hand, but something in her silence told me we were no longer two women embraced by loss. We were two islands, each beginning to drift apart. You can't stay alone, Mom. Come live with us, she told me weeks later, and I agreed. I didn't sell the house because I wanted to, but because Addison insisted. She said it was dangerous, that the pipes no longer worked, that the neighborhood was full of break-ins, that the house was too big for me alone. We can take care of you. Sweet words like poisoned candy. I moved in with them in November. The house was modern, one of those soulless houses with gray furniture and perfect curtains. Piper's room was full of books and colorful lights. Graham worked from home, locked away in his office. Addison spent her days organizing things, and I cooked, swept, watered the plants. You don't have to do that, Mom, Addison said in a hurried voice as she put on her shoes. But if I didn't, no one did. At first, I thought it was normal, that they were busy, that life was like that now. But little by little, I began to see the cracks. Addison wouldn't look me in the eye. Graham would leave the room when I entered. Piper, though sweet, avoided speaking to me in front of her parents. I started noticing subtle changes. My favorite mug disappeared. My small radio, which Elias had given me, was put away without asking. One day I came back from the supermarket, and my portrait with Elias was no longer on the shelf. I put it away so it wouldn't fall, Addison said, but the frame was metal. It never fell. I didn't answer, just nodded. And then the whispers, the conversations behind closed doors, the quick glances when I walked by, Graham's hasty exits, until one day I heard my name. But we can't go on like this. This is too much of a burden. She doesn't work. She doesn't contribute anything. And you know the house is already in our name. Don't say that in front of Piper. I'm not, but sooner or later, she has to go. I stood motionless in the hallway, not because of what they said, but because it didn't surprise me. Something inside me already knew. The secret treasure in the basement. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the bed, the blanket on my knees, watching my hands, the same ones that knitted Addison's clothes, that held her when she had a fever, that buried Elias, that prepared his coffee every morning. Now they trembled not from age, but from rage. I searched through my papers. Addison had insisted on transferring the new house into her and Graham's names. For security reasons, Mom. You're older now, and if something happens, it's easier this way. I signed without thinking. I trusted her. She was my daughter. But that day, with the papers in hand, something struck me that made my blood run cold. The signature wasn't mine. It resembled it, yes, but it wasn't my handwriting. No, not that stroke. I checked the remaining documents, Elias's will, the joint accounts, the transfers. There were movements I had never authorized, and then I saw the email open on Graham's old laptop. Beneficiary change confirmation. Dated 3 months prior. I no longer existed. Not as an owner, not as a mother, only as an obstacle. I closed the folder again, went to the kitchen, made tea, and sat on the patio, where the wind still smelled of grass and damp earth. I looked at the sky, and for the first time in years, I didn't pray. I just thought of all I had given and all they would lose. From that day on, I spoke only what was necessary. I pretended not to understand. I let Addison believe her mother was being rewritten. Time would do its work. But at night, while they slept, I transformed into someone else. I unpacked the files from Elias's old email. I contacted our former trusted attorney, Sawyer. I sent him the documents, told him everything. I didn't ask for justice, I asked for silence. And I began to build my way out. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just waited. I waited for lunch, for the moment Addison would explode, for the instant they would finally publicly shatter me. Believing it was the end. But it was only the beginning. I didn't pack my things. I left the suitcases lying open there, like bodies, visible to all. Addison locked herself in her room. Graham disappeared into his study. And Piper. Piper was the only one who approached. "Grandma, are you leaving?" Her eyes were swollen, but she wasn't crying. She was a strong child. She had learned to be strong in a house where emotions were disguised as duties. I looked at her, slowly stroked her hair, and told her the only thing I could say without revealing what was to come. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Grandma always knows what to do." Piper hugged me tightly. In that moment, I knew she was the only one who had seen everything. From the first ungratefully served plate to the last angry insult. She wasn't a foolish child. She watched, kept silent, and understood, just like me. Revenge begins in silence. That night, while the house slept, I began to execute my plan. The first step was to return to the old house everyone thought was sold. The truth was, I had made a deal with an old friend of Elias's, Nolan, who had nominally bought the house as a favor, just on paper, to prevent Addison from secretly selling it. Nolan had understood my fear when I told him something was wrong and agreed to freeze the sale for 6 months, without telling anyone. This house still belonged to me. When I re-entered, the walls smelled of dust and memory. The curtains were drawn, the furniture covered with sheets, but there were the portraits, the old radio, the embroidered pillows, everything Addison had called worthless, the things that made me me. I turned on the light, searched the living room, and felt something I hadn't felt in months: identity. I spent the whole night organizing documents, checking accounts, recalling passwords I thought I'd forgotten. I changed passwords, transferred funds to secure accounts, reactivated insurance policies in my name, and closed the joint accounts Addison had opened without my consent. All this in silence, with hands that no longer trembled. At dawn, I contacted Sawyer, the attorney I had known for decades. I requested an urgent appointment. I brought all the papers in a red folder, which I always used for important things. He looked at me surprised when I told him what I had discovered. "Lila, are you sure you want to do this alone?" "I'm sure I have to," I replied without hesitation. We amended the will. I removed Addison and Graham from any inheritance rights. I transferred everything I owned, the old house, the parcel of land in Sedona that Elias had left me as a reserve, and the money from the frozen accounts, into a trust fund in Piper's name, with restricted access until she was 21 years old. I added a clause: should anyone, related or not, contest the will or the trust fund, the entire estate would go directly to charities supporting vulnerable senior women. This was my way of securing the future and punishing them without having to touch anyone myself. I returned home as if nothing had happened. Addison didn't speak to me. Graham barely looked up from his phone. Piper watched me from the sofa with a silent question in her eyes. I winked at her, like in her childhood when we played secrets. I waited. Days later, Addison announced they would sell the house. Graham spoke with a realtor. They say they can give us a good price. You can go to Aunt Eden's while we look for something smaller. It'll be better for everyone. And when did I decide that? I asked in a neutral voice. Addison scoffed. Mom, please, you don't decide anything here anymore. That sentence pierced me, but I didn't react. I just nodded. I let them believe I had given up. I let Graham show the house to buyers. I let them make plans. I gave them enough rope. Meanwhile, I executed phase 2. I returned to the old house and retrieved what I needed: photos, papers, Elias's letters, my music box, the reliquary. I called a moving company under a different name, Piper Rios. I arranged for everything to be shipped to a new address, a small coastal town in Southern California, where I had bought a modest house with the money from the Sedona property. Everything was in Piper's name. The day before my disappearance, I left a letter in her backpack, hidden among her school books. I asked her to read it only after I had left. I trusted she would. The disappearance and the new beginning. And so the last day came. A sunny, quiet Tuesday. Addison left early. Graham was shut away. I walked out with a small suitcase, as if I were going to the market. But this time, I didn't come back. I disappeared without screams, without goodbyes, without drama. I left the phone, the watch, the fake family photos behind. I took a bus heading south. For hours, I looked out the window. I thought of Elias, how he would have embraced me if he were still alive, how he would have felt if he had seen what his daughter had become, how he would have said, "Lila, that's enough." And yes, it was enough. I settled into the new house with the help of a kind neighbor. He knew nothing about me, and that's how it was meant to stay. I presented myself as a retiree who had decided to start anew. No one asked many questions. People here respected others' silence. I sat on the small patio with a cup of coffee in my hand and felt my heart finally beat in peace. A week later, the storm came.
Addison called me over 20 times.
Graham sent desperate emails. Piper remained silent. I let the messages accumulate. The next day, I received an email from Sawyer, the attorney. They had tried to sell the house, but the notary had blocked the transaction. They no longer had rights to anything. Addison exploded on social media, posting a crying video, saying, I was sick, manipulated, and that Graham and she were victims. They portrayed me as an old, paranoid, unjust woman. I didn't respond. But when Piper read my letter, everything changed. One night, I received a message from an account I barely recognized. Grandma, now I understand everything. I'm with you. Wait for me. And I knew I wasn't alone. Addison's video went viral within hours. Her feigned, broken voice, red eyes, trembling hands. She said her daughter had been kidnapped by a crazy and vindictive grandmother she knew nothing about. She feared for her well-being. Graham appeared beside her, nodding silently, with an expression of restrained pain. They even used a photo of me, taken without my permission, one where I was sleeping on the sofa, to evoke sympathy. Comments were split between those who believed them and those who doubted. But it didn't matter. The goal wasn't truth, but control. Addison couldn't live without everything under her control. She had inherited some of it from me, but she had distorted it. I remained silent. I deleted all my social media accounts, changed my number, closed old accounts. I left only a physical mailbox active in the village where I could receive letters if Piper wanted to write to me, the only person I still maintained a connection with. Days later, Sawyer, the attorney, wrote to me saying Addison and Graham had tried to contest the will. They presented forged documents, even an alleged medical examination claiming I suffered from mild cognitive impairment. They used the signature of a doctor who had passed away 3 years prior. Everything was so clumsy it hurt. The attempt failed within minutes. Everything was in order. There were cameras, recordings, witnesses, evidence. I had signed everything with full awareness, with verified data, updated health analyses, and impartial witnesses. Every step had been registered. Sawyer, the old fox, had left no loose ends. That was the first blow they couldn't handle. The following week, Nolan appeared at the house Addison wanted to sell. He entered with a court order, stating that everything on the property had to be removed within 48 hours. Graham screamed. Addison cried, but the house no longer belonged to them. The revenge of silence. Then the threats began. Rumors reached me that Graham was talking about hiring a private investigator to track my movements using old contacts. Addison went even further. She tried to contact Eden, my distant cousin, to ask her to mediate. Eden, wise and loyal, said not a word. She wrote me a short note. "They don't know how strong you've become, Lila.
I'm proud."
One night, as I was drinking tea on the patio, I saw a girl running down the street. She reminded me of Piper. She had the same way of moving her arms, the same loose braid. Then I heard a knock at the door. I walked slowly, opened it, and there she was. Piper, alone with a small backpack, eyes swollen but determined. "I knew everything, Grandma. I always knew. Can I stay with you?" I hugged her without saying anything. It wasn't necessary. In her embrace, I felt all the anger I had held back, all the sadness, all the abandonment. I had left her alone to protect her, but now she had come to me, not as a victim, but as a witness. That night, Piper told me things I had suspected but which hurt to hear spoken aloud, that Addison controlled her phone, that Graham yelled at her if she mentioned my name, that for years they had been telling her, "Grandma is crazy," that they used her name to open accounts without permission, forged her signature on school documents, and silenced her with subtle threats, that she once heard Graham say, "When your grandma dies, we can finally do what we want." Piper had seen everything, felt everything, and yet she had kept silent, just like me. Now I understood that silence wasn't her mission, it was preparation. We spent the following days reorganizing our lives. I enrolled her in a local school under a different last name. We changed her hairstyle. I gave her a new notebook for writing. On her first day of school, she sat on the patio and said, "It breathes differently here, doesn't it?" I smiled, nodded, taught her how to make chamomile tea, taught her to knit, taught her what a mother should have taught her, to trust her intuition, to observe, to defend herself without screaming, to say no without guilt. One morning, as I was reading the newspaper, I found a column written by an older woman. It spoke about how many mothers become emotional slaves to their children, how gratitude is demanded of them while they are emotionally bled dry. I saw myself in every line. I decided to write my own story. Not to publish it, not for revenge, but to understand myself. Every night, while Piper slept, I sat at my old typewriter and began to remember what Elias was like, what little Addison was like before she hardened, how I gave in to avoid conflict, how I ended up invisible in a house I had built with love. One day I received a letter with no return address, messily written, "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know you'd react like this. I thought you'd understand. I just wanted everything to be okay.
I'm losing everything.
Graham isn't talking to me. Piper is gone. Where are you? I need you to come back. I need to fix this." I didn't respond. 2 days later. Another letter. "I know you're alive. Eden told me. Please, please don't leave me alone. I don't know what to do. Forgive me." I tore it up without reading further. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it was no longer my pain to take care of. Piper and I planted hydrangeas that day. She chose the colors. I prepared the soil. We didn't talk much, but there was peace. Every time the wind passed by, it carried the scent of fresh earth, warm tea, new roots. One winter morning, as I was baking bread, Piper said to me, "Do you know what I dreamed? That one day you'll write your story, and many women will read it and do the same." I laughed. "I can't write for others, my child." "Yes, you can. You just have to tell what you've already experienced." Piper had understood everything. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need Addison to be punished in court. She had already lost everything. The worst thing that could happen to her had already happened. Her mother left, and her daughter did too. I lived, was free, and I wasn't hiding. I had chosen silence only as protection. The story wasn't over, but I was no longer afraid of the next chapter. The echo of freedom. Winter arrived without warning. Mornings were a soft mist covering the land like a thick cloth, and the smell of burning wood hung in the air like a promise of warmth. Piper had adapted quickly, faster than I expected. She helped me with breakfast, sweeping the yard, reading the letters that still arrived in the mailbox. Many with no return address, others with clumsy signatures meant to seem sincere. I didn't answer any. One night, as I was knitting a blue scarf for Piper, she came downstairs with a sheet of paper in her hand. Her face was serious, more serious than usual. "Grandma," she said, "this was in my backpack today." I took the paper carefully. It was a printout of an email. It had no full header, only the message text. But the text made my blood run cold. "We know where you are. Stop hiding. This won't stand. You turned her against us. You're a witch. You'll pay for what you've done. This child is our daughter, not yours." Graham, though he didn't sign it, the phrasing, the type of accusation, the exact words, it was clearly his voice printed in letters. I knew him too well. I looked at Piper. She wasn't afraid. She was angry. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "Stay here. They won't drive me away again." I nodded. It wasn't time to flee, it was time to anchor ourselves, to strengthen, to fortify. The next morning, I spoke with Levi, Sawyer's friend who worked in cybersecurity. I sent him the scanned email, and within hours, he confirmed it came from an account linked to Graham. Not only that, there were other attempts to track us via apps. Failed access attempts to accounts I had already closed, desperate moves. Levi offered to help. He installed a security system in the house, discrete cameras, window sensors, and an encrypted server to store future evidence. Everything was under control. It wasn't paranoia, it was precaution. They didn't know the hunt had now turned. For weeks, nothing happened, or so it seemed, but the calm was tense, as if the forest was holding its breath. One afternoon, while Piper was at school, I heard the doorbell. I didn't open it. I watched from the side window. It was Graham, alone, disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes and a bag in his hand. "Lila," he shouted, "I know you're there. I need to talk to you, please." He approached the door, knocking once, twice, 3 times. "Addison is doing badly. She isn't eating. She isn't sleeping. She says you abandoned her. She says you betrayed her." I didn't answer. "Piper needs to see her mother. You can't just steal her like this. She doesn't belong to you." Then he pulled a piece of paper from his bag. He held it up like a white flag. "This is a letter from Addison. Please read it. Just read it." He placed it on the ground and left. I waited half an hour before opening the door. I picked up the letter with gloves, scanned it, photographed it, saved it. The letter read, "Mom, if you're reading this, it's because Graham sought you out. I didn't want things to end this way. I didn't want to scream at you. I just felt betrayed." The letter continued with complaints, ambiguous accusations cast to the wind, as if she couldn't take responsibility for her own actions. There wasn't a single genuine-sounding apology, only need, only emptiness. I didn't respond. That night, Piper returned with bright eyes. They said at school that Graham asked about me, that he spoke with the principal. That was enough. I called Sawyer. We activated the protocol. I had temporary custody while the courts of the former state adjudicated the change of residence. But now, with the attempt at school harassment, I could apply for full protection. The next day, I presented the evidence, the written threats, the unauthorized visits, the attempts at manipulation, everything. In 3 days, the judge issued a restraining order. Graham and Addison were not allowed to approach Piper within 500 yards. No physical contact, no calls, no messages. That night I cried, not from sadness but from relief. I had taken the reins. I was no longer a mother begging for attention. I was a woman protecting her granddaughter, her home, her sacred silence. Weeks, then months passed. Spring came with new shoots in the garden. We planted mint next to the hydrangeas. Piper wrote a story for school about a woman who turned into a tree. She said when the woman could no longer cry, her roots grew beneath the earth, embracing her granddaughter from the depths of the world. I told her that story held some truth. She smiled. The end of the noise. One day, I received a large envelope with no return address. I opened it carefully. It was a file, copies of messages, screenshots, documents, all from an unknown number. But at the end was a handwritten note: "Not everyone was blind. They talk more than they should. I thought this might be useful to you." It was Nolan, Graham's younger brother. He was never close, but he always observed, always silently. Perhaps he had seen more than he let on. The evidence was clear. Addison and Graham were still trying to move bank accounts in my name. They were still signing as if they were Piper's legal representatives. They were still fabricating documents. Everything was illegal. Everything was grotesque. Sawyer and Levi compiled a complete dossier. They sent it to the authorities. This time, not for defense, but for offense. I didn't tell Piper anything. She didn't need to know the details. She just needed to keep growing. That night, while we were having dinner, Piper said to me, "Sometimes I wonder if Mom will ever understand why I left with you." I replied, "One day maybe, but it doesn't depend on you for her to understand, only on her." "Do you miss her?" "No, but I'm not waiting for her anymore either." Piper nodded, and in that gesture, I knew we had crossed the last boundary of grief. We no longer cried for what we didn't have. Now we defended what we had built. A new life in silence, without screams, with roots. Routine had settled like dust on the shelves, quiet, persistent, almost invisible. But I felt it in the small movements, in the way Piper hung her backpack when she arrived, always on the same hook, how she placed her drawing book next to my teacup on the table. Everything had a new order, one that was ours. We had rebuilt everyday life from nothing, as if the former life had been just a bad rehearsal. But what seems stable is sometimes just a well-staged backdrop, and the performance, as always, had more hidden acts. One Saturday morning, as I was watering the plants on the balcony, my phone rang persistently. It was an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Ms. Lila?" A nervous female voice asked. "This is Eden. I worked with your daughter at the company for a few years. I didn't know if I should call you, but I found something you need to see." My heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from a premonition. I always knew Addison wouldn't stop, and this call was no exception. It was another crack in her mask. We met at a discreet cafe on the outskirts of town. Eden was young, trembling, with deep dark circles under her eyes. She carried a folder and a USB stick. She explained that she had been Addison's administrative assistant, and recently, when the company servers were being migrated, she had found files with altered data. Addison had used my name to acquire properties, make transfers, justify bank movements. She even signed documents as if they were incapacitated, Eden said softly. She fabricated medical reports, all with a certain Graham signature and the stamp of a clinic that no longer exists. I opened the folder. Every document was worse than the last. Addison had declared me mentally incompetent to certain institutions. She had faked that I was receiving palliative care and applied for my entire estate to be managed by her family. For my safety. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked directly. "Eden, swallow it." Because I told her I couldn't keep this to myself anymore, and she fired me the next day. She threatened me. She said she would ruin my career, but I have a sick mother, Ms. Lila. I can't be unemployed and carry this burden. I looked into her eyes. It was genuine. She was scared, but she had dignity. I thanked her. I asked her to leave a signed statement and assured her that her name would not appear anywhere without her consent. Eden agreed and hugged me before she left. I returned home, the folder pressed tightly to my chest. Each page was a stab. Not because of what they said, but because of what they meant. Addison had been planning my legal demise for over a year. It wasn't enough for her that I left. She needed the world to believe I no longer counted, that I was a shadow, a signature, a useful ghost for her plans. That night, I didn't sleep. I went to the attic and took out the old box where I kept Addison's baby photos. I looked at them one by one, her first tooth, her first day of school, her graduation. I had always been there, in every corner of her life, and now I was being treated as an obstacle, as a document to be eliminated. I turned on the floor lamp, took a notebook, and began to write. Every detail, every conversation, every confirmed suspicion. It wasn't out of resentment, it was out of precision. This notebook would be my map. Days later, I met with Sawyer and Levi. I showed them everything, Eden's evidence, the documents, the signatures, the dates. Sawyer looked at me gravely. Lila, this is bigger than we imagined. This is no longer just family harassment. It's fraud, forgery, identity theft. We can initiate criminal proceedings. And if we do that? I asked, what do we gain? Justice, and protection for the future. They won't stop. But if we get the justice system to acknowledge their situation, they can no longer touch you or Piper. I nodded. The decision was made. The wall of truth. The following weeks were a meticulous choreography. Notarized statements, engagement of handwriting experts, legal access to the records of the defunct clinic. All in complete silence. No one outside the circle knew what was underway. Piper noticed something was happening but didn't ask. She just hugged me tighter at night. She started placing drawings under my pillow. In one, she drew me as a white wolf with moon eyes. "That's how I see you, Grandma," she said one morning. "You always see in the dark." I smiled, but internally I sensed that the child understood more than she said. One Friday afternoon, I received an unexpected email. It was from Addison, not saying much, just, "I know what you're doing. It doesn't have to be this way. We can handle this as a family. Leave lawyers out of it." I ignored her. The following Monday, I received a formal notification. Graham and Addison had filed a kidnapping complaint. They accused me of illegally holding Piper, manipulating her against her parents, and psychologically endangering her. It was their last move, but they were too late. We had already prepared everything. Sawyer submitted the complete dossier to the family court. Evidence of emotional neglect, threats, school manipulation, and now document fraud. Eden gave an anonymous but notarized statement. The recordings of Graham at the door, the letters, Piper's psychological report, prepared by an independent professional, confirming her stability and attachment to me. The judge took time for a decision. Permanent custody for me. An extended restraining order, the opening of a criminal investigation. The verdict was read aloud in a white courtroom where the lawyers and I were present. I didn't cry, I just closed my eyes and breathed. I left the building like someone returning from a funeral. Not from sadness, but from closure. Addison and Graham had dug their own moral grave, and I had only held up a mirror to them. That evening, Piper hugged me wordlessly. We sat on the porch with cups of tea in our hands, watching the crickets sing among the bushes. Everything seemed simple, alive, true. I knew that further attempts, more letters, more lies would come, but it didn't matter. The game had changed, and this time, I held the board. Life in peace. The verdict had been announced, but I knew this wasn't the end. Graham and Addison weren't the kind of people who accepted defeat with dignity. No, they were the kind of people who, faced with loss, would overturn the table, smash the plates, and try to burn the house down with everyone in it. And precisely for that reason, I couldn't trust justice as my only shield. It wasn't enough for them to leave us alone out of legal obligation. We needed to disappear from their radar, and for that, I had to become something I had never been before, invisible. Not a sad invisibility imposed by age or loneliness. This was a chosen, sharp, calculated invisibility, a refuge built from silence and strategy. I started with the most basic thing, the house. I called Levi. I asked him to discreetly initiate the sale process. Nothing public, nothing on online portals, only private buyers, trustworthy acquaintances. He understood immediately. He handled everything from a real estate agency in another state, with powers of attorney signed outside the usual channels. No one, not even the neighbors, suspected that the house where I had spent almost my entire life, where I raised Addison, where Piper had rediscovered trust in the world, was about to be sold. Every time I looked at it, I felt a mix of nostalgia and relief. I no longer wanted to be tied to these walls that had witnessed everything. The parties, the screams, the betrayals. Meanwhile, I deleted my social networks, closed old accounts, erased digital footprints, disconnected my name from services, catalogs, purchase records. Anything that could provide a clue to our future whereabouts was deleted or changed. I changed my phone number, even started paying cash in places where I used to use credit cards. Every small gesture was another brick in the wall that would separate them from us. Piper didn't ask much. She knew something would change. Sometimes I saw her looking at the boxes piled in the attic or the bags of clothes ready for donation. One day, while we were packing books, she looked at me with wide eyes. "Are we leaving for good?" I nodded calmly. "Yes, my dear, we're leaving to be safe and so you can have the life you deserve." She thought for a moment, then said something that left me speechless. "Can we have a garden with sunflowers?" I hugged her and silently promised we would. One afternoon, when Piper was at school, I sat down with Sawyer and Levi. I showed them the plan. The sale of the house was already well underway. The main bank account had been emptied and transferred to several smaller accounts at different banks, some of them overseas. All legal, all traceable, but extremely difficult for someone like Addison or Graham to connect. I also showed them the new documents I had applied for, a new tax address, a new social security number for me, a request for Piper's name change, not yet legal, but in the school and medical environment. I wanted her to stop being a target with a name and last name. I wanted to give her anonymity. "And where do you plan to go?" Sawyer asked with a mix of admiration and concern. "To a small village by the sea. I have an acquaintance who rents out a cottage. No one knows me there. It's perfect." Levi nodded. "Lila, you're doing what many don't dare to do. Not flee, but be reborn." That night, I sat down to write a letter. Not to Addison, not to Graham, but to myself. In it, I wrote everything I had kept silent for years, the times I denied myself to be a mother, the times I felt guilty for not recognizing the poison growing at home sooner, the times I tolerated contempt, mockery, erasure. But I also wrote about the strength born in pain, the strength Piper unknowingly awakened in me, which had always been there but which I had hidden beneath duty. I folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and hid it in an old poetry book by Alfonsina Storni, which I kept in the only box that would travel with me. The New Life by the Sea. The days passed as if someone were driving them. Everything accelerated, the empty house began to echo. I left some old furniture behind to distract them and announced that the handover would be unfurnished. I said goodbye to my closest neighbor without giving her many details. I told her I would be visiting relatives indefinitely. She believed me. She always believed me. One morning, we set off. Piper slept in the back seat of Levi's car, hugging her teddy bear. I carried a backpack, the notebook with all the evidence, the new documents, and the book with the hidden letter. That was all we needed. As we drove down the road, I looked one last time at the roofs of our old neighborhood. I felt no sadness, only a deep and calm determination. Left behind were the screams, the humiliations, the hidden threats. Ahead of us lay the sea. Addison took 2 weeks to realize we were gone. I knew it from an email Sawyer forwarded to me, sent from Graham's account. It was full of insults, accusations of emotional kidnapping, legal threats. They said they would sue me for money laundering. Ridiculous. The house sale was complete. The money was safe. Piper's custody was unassailable, and they, no matter how much noise they made, were just shouting into the void, because we were no longer there. I received screenshots of their social media posts, videos in which Addison cried. She said her daughter had been kidnapped by a crazy and vindictive grandmother she knew nothing about. She feared for her well-being. In the comments, some defended them, but others began to doubt. Weren't they the ones who threw her out at lunch? And the letters, and the video of Graham shouting at the door? This doesn't smell right. I watched silently. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. I no longer lived in their world. In the new village, everything was different. The streets smelled of salt. The neighbors were discreet, the shops small. Piper was enrolled under a different last name, using only her real first name. She began attending a crafts school, where she learned gardening, drawing, and music. She carried sunflowers in her pocket. Every now and then, she drew me, no longer as a wolf, now as a tree. Because you always stand firm, even when the wind comes, she said. Sometimes, while she slept, I would go out to the porch with a cup of jasmine tea and allow myself to cry. Not from sadness, but from relief. It was as if every tear washed away a remnant of Addison within me. I never responded to any of their messages again. No calls, no letters. One afternoon, when I opened the box with the Storny book, I found the letter I had written to myself. I read it with different eyes and understood that everything I had experienced was not a story of pain, but of powerful transformation, that I had been a broken mother, a broken grandmother, but now I was a whole, unwavering woman. I tore the letter into small pieces and buried it under a sunflower, because some words are meant to be said only once and then released. The echo of regained peace. There is no silence that lasts forever when there are people who cannot bear loss. And I knew Addison and Graham would reappear sooner or later. Not because they loved us, not because they missed Piper, but because control was like oxygen to them. Without it, they suffocated. The first attempt was predictable. A certified letter arrived at the post office box we had used for the sale papers. Levi brought it to me. It was signed by an attorney with pompous letterhead, full of stamps and Latin phrases. The content was clear. We demand the immediate return of the minor Piper Lopez to her biological mother, Addison Lopez, as we consider her retention an unlawful forced deprivation. We reserve the right to initiate civil and criminal proceedings. It didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was that they included a link. Upon opening it, a video uploaded to social media played. Addison spoke before a camera. White background, neutral clothing, trembling voice. Today, I speak to you as a mother, as a desperate mother who doesn't know where her daughter is. Pause. My mother, Lila, took her without my permission. She turned off all her phones, sold the family home, and we haven't heard from them since. The manipulation was surgical. Every word carefully chosen to evoke empathy, every tear placed at the right moment. One could even hear soft music in the background, like in crime documentaries. But what made my stomach turn the most was when they showed a photo of Piper, pixelated for protection. I just want to know if she's okay. If you see me, my child, please say something. Don't leave me. I paused the video. I couldn't watch anymore. Sawyer called me that night. Lila, this isn't just emotional manipulation. They're preparing the ground for a legal battle. Let them come, I replied. I have more evidence than they have fake tears. Because, yes, I had prepared myself too. Every recorded insult, every saved message, every witness willing to testify, the custody documentation, the photos of the suitcases thrown on the floor. Everything was organized, classified, sealed. But it wasn't just a legal question, they wanted something else. They wanted to drag me back into their theater, to make me step onto the stage, to respond, to defend myself. And there lay the true confrontation. I had to decide whether to fight or to disappear completely. The next day, they arrived in the village. I saw them from the bakery window, Graham's grey car, him getting out with his dark glasses. Addison behind him, with a scarf, as if they were tourists, but their eyes swept the street like hunters. They had found the address, perhaps through an oversight, or perhaps they had followed Levi. It didn't matter. They arrived at the house in the afternoon. They didn't ring the doorbell. They knocked violently.
Lila, open the door.
Piper was in her room. I took her to the bathroom, asked her not to make any noise, and locked the door. Then I slowly went downstairs. From the kitchen window, I watched them. Graham's face was red. Addison cried, but there was no sadness. It was rage disguised as pain. That's my daughter. You can't hide her from me. I recorded everything on my phone, then retrieved a folder with the legal documents. I went out onto the porch. This child is under my legal guardianship. You voluntarily relinquished your parental rights, and there is public evidence of emotional abuse. This is trespassing. That was before. You manipulated her, Addison screamed, trembling. You abandoned her. Graham took a step forward. He almost shoved me. What are you going to do? Call the police. No, they've already been informed, and this conversation is being recorded. I said it with a calm that unnerved him. He stepped back. Addison collapsed to the ground. You're a witch, a bitter old woman. You've always hated us. I don't hate you, I replied. We simply no longer exist for you, and you don't for us. At that moment, a police patrol car appeared at the end of the street. I hadn't called them that day. I had called them 2 days prior, anticipating everything. I showed them the papers. The officers asked them to step back. Graham tried to argue. Addison screamed that she was a grieving mother, but they were escorted away. Not arrested, just escorted, but they left. It wasn't the end. After a few days, more videos circulated, this time with other family members, distant cousins, neighbors who had never understood anything, all talking, all crying, all accusing. I didn't respond, and then the bomb dropped, a lawsuit for emotional kidnapping, psychological coercion, and parental alienation. Empty but loud words. It was a war of reputations, of narratives. And then I decided that the confrontation had to end, not in court, but in the story. I prepared my own video, not to publish it, just to record it. I sat in front of a camera in a room with natural light, unmade up, without music. My name is Lila Lopez. I am 68 years old, and this is my story. I told everything from the lunch onward, the suitcases, the insults, the documents, the witnesses. I showed screenshots, dates, signatures, nothing emotional, just facts. And at the end I said, I seek no punishment, only peace. This child deserves a safe environment, and I deserve the right to silence. I saved the video, sent it to my attorney and to 2 journalists Sawyer trusted, just in case we needed it. But we didn't, because little by little Addison and Graham's story began to unravel on its own. People started remembering their attitudes. Old comments resurfaced, compromising photos. The video from lunch was re-edited and went viral. Public opinion shifted. I didn't celebrate. I just lit a candle and read Piper a poem. They tried one last maneuver, a court order that the child should testify. But Piper already had her version clear, and the judge understood everything when she saw her. She's doing well. She's happy, stable. This is not a kidnapped minor, it's a rescued child. The case was closed, and they never came back. The house no longer smelled of fear. It smelled of toast in the mornings, jasmine tea in the afternoons, of old wood breathing again after years of silence. It had no luxury, no large garden, no superfluous rooms, but it had silence, a different silence, not the silence of before, full of broken sighs, of footsteps afraid to be heard, of words swallowed to avoid a storm. It was a silence full of peace, like an empty page. The final homecoming. Piper no longer asked about them. Only sometimes, if she saw an old photo she'd found in a forgotten book, she'd say to me, "Do you think they'll ever change?" And I answered her, without drama. People don't change because you want them to. They change when life forces them or when they completely lose themselves. She nodded, but not sadly. She no longer cried for her mother. She had understood something that many women, even at 50, don't understand, that love is not begged for, that affection is not pleaded for, that there are bonds that bring more pain than healing, and that cutting these bonds is not betrayal, but survival. This autumn was gentle. The wind barely caressed the leaves, the streets turned copper. The neighbors would come for coffee some afternoons, asking if everything the videos said was true. I didn't answer, just poured another cup and changed the subject. Because I understood that I didn't need to justify my version. Those who want to understand do so in silence. One afternoon, Piper came into the house with a potted plant. "This is mint," she said. "I like how it smells." She placed it by the kitchen window. The sun touched it in the mornings. Every day it grew a little more. I liked watering it silently, watching its leaves stretch as if greeting the day. Sawyer came less often. His constant presence was no longer needed, but when he came, he would stay long on the porch, silently watching the sunset, and say to me, "Lila, when I met you, you were broken. Now you look like an oak tree." I smiled. I didn't feel like an oak tree. I felt like a river, one that had stopped fighting the current and had learned to flow where it was meant to go. Life reorganized itself, Not as before, but better, in our own way. We started to write. Piper had notebooks full of stories. Some sad, some funny. She would let me read them sometimes, ask for advice. I corrected spelling, but no emotions, because what came from her was real, pure, brave. In one of these stories, she wrote about a girl who lived with a quiet woman in a small house, and how together they defeated invisible monsters that lived in the walls. It touched me so much that I kept it in a blue folder, the same one where I had previously archived all the evidence against Addison and Graham. We no longer needed those papers, but I kept this story as a reminder of who we were and what we had survived. One day, a letter arrived unannounced. It had no return address. The handwriting was familiar. Addison. I opened it emotionlessly. I know I have failed as a mother, as a daughter, as a human being. I don't ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted to tell you that I dreamed of you. And in the dream, you told me that you no longer had me. I don't know if it was a dream or a wish. I folded it carefully. I put it in a box where I kept things that no longer hurt. I closed it. I didn't respond. I felt neither hatred nor sadness, only distance, like someone remembering a place they would never return to. That night, I cooked soup. Piper set the table. She used an embroidered tablecloth that belonged to my mother. We lit a candle. Not out of nostalgia, but out of habit. And as we ate, she said, "Grandma, were you happy before all this happened?" The question surprised me. I thought, looking at the soup, the candle, the tablecloth, her calm face. "I don't know," I replied. "I think I didn't know what happiness was until everything that hurt me was gone." She smiled. "I am happy." Now we hugged for a long time, wordlessly. After dinner, we went out to the porch. It was a full moon. The air smelled of damp earth, and then I did something I had wanted to do for months. I went to the closet. I took out the box with the documents, the photos, the recordings, the printouts, and brought them to the yard. I lit a small fire. I said nothing. I just opened it, and little by little, leaf by leaf, I threw them into the fire. Piper watched me silently. She asked nothing, she simply sat beside me. The flames danced, the paper crackled, the smoke rose like a farewell ascending to the sky. When I was finished, I threw the empty box, and then the last item, the old key to the former house, which had once been my prison, my hell. I watched it melt, twist, turn to nothing, and then, only then, I took a deep breath. The next day, I woke early, made mint tea with fresh leaves, sat in the rocking chair on the porch, and wrote a final sentence in my diary. They never touched my name again. And so it happened. They never came back. The gentle echo of freedom, the morning light, streamed softly through the window like a caress. It made no sound, announced nothing. It just came, warm and golden, stroking the old furniture, the crooked pictures, the steaming tea in the blue ceramic mug. I liked getting up before Piper. There was something sacred about that first moment of the day. No one demanded anything, no one asked for anything. Just the world and I, breathing together. I sat in the chair on the porch, the blanket on my legs, the air smelled of damp earth. It had rained at dawn. Everything seemed cleaner, newer, as if the sky wanted to wash us clean inside too. Piper was still asleep. I heard her turn in bed, murmuring in her sleep. Sometimes she said my name, sometimes her mother's. Not in a tone of resentment, rather like someone uttering a word that no longer carries a burden, that no longer hurts, but that was once an anchor. We learned to live without resentment. It wasn't easy. The silence was sometimes so deep it ached. But I preferred this silence to the noise of before, the noise of manipulative words, of footsteps demanding obedience, of sighs pleading for love. Life was now woven with different threads, with different rhythms. Sawyer came on Saturdays, bringing homemade bread, a book, and always something for Piper, a notebook, a scarf, a thought to ponder. We never spoke of Addison or Graham. There were silent agreements between us, not out of cowardice, but out of dignity. There were things no longer worth naming. One afternoon, Piper asked me to accompany her to the flea market. She liked old dedications in books. She said they were like forgotten letters in time. "Look here," she said, showing me one with a worn cover, For my daughter, who should never stop dreaming. Do you think her daughter read it? Perhaps not, I replied, but the message reached you, and that counts too. We sat on a park bench. The sun filtered through the leaves. A group of children played nearby. One came up and offered her a picked flower. Piper took it, smiling, and placed it in her book. Do you regret anything, Grandma? She asked suddenly. I looked at her. Her eyes belonged to another generation, but they were also mine. In them lay strength, tenderness, and a determination I hadn't had at her age. Only that I kept silent for so long, I said, that I believed love was patience. She didn't reply, she simply took my hand, and so we sat, watching the children run. The triumph of peace. That night, I found a box in my closet that I hadn't opened in years. Inside were old photographs, letters from my mother, a medal I received after graduation, and a handkerchief embroidered with my initials. I took everything out and spread it on the bed. Piper entered silently. She sat beside me, asked nothing. We no longer needed explanations. What were you like as a young girl? She asked suddenly. I smiled, not from nostalgia, but from gratitude, dreamy, clumsy, innocent. I believed everything could be solved with tenderness. And now? Now I know that tenderness needs boundaries, that love without respect is a trap, that one must also learn to love oneself, even if that means moving away from those you love most. Piper nodded. We packed everything back into the box, except for the handkerchief. She asked if she could keep it. She said she wanted to embroider her own initials on it. I let her. I put the box away in the dresser. And as she stitched, tongue between her lips, focused, I thought, I am watching a ritual of rebirth. A week later, she woke me with a tray. Mint tea, bread with jam, and an envelope. This is for you, she said. I opened it. It was a handwritten letter in her script. Grandma Lila, thank you for saving me, not just from them, but from myself. From becoming what I didn't want to be, from living a life I didn't understand. Thank you for your silence, for your strength, for your glances that spoke without words. I learned from you that not everything is screamed, that revenge is sometimes the greatest joy of living in peace, that women like you teach with actions, not with shouts. I love you more than words can say, and one day, when I have a daughter, I will tell her your story so she knows that grandmothers are also heroines. With love, Piper. I didn't cry. I just took her hand, kissed it, and smiled, because I understood that everything had been worth it. Every night of crying, every day of fear, every step of distance had been worth it, because she lived, because she had broken the cycle, because she wasn't repeating the pattern. That day, we walked along the riverbank. The water flowed calmly, the sky was clear, and the scent of wildflowers drifted on the air. We found a stone bench, we sat down. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. And now? She asked. Now we live, I replied, without fear, without guilt, without the past. She rested her head on my shoulder, and so we sat, watching the water flow. We were in no hurry, for finally, time was on our side.